It is my absolute pleasure, though, to hand over to our next panel. And the panel will be discussing mapping Darebin's climate emergency journey. And our facilitator, Rachel Olivier, who is our General Manager of Sustainability and Strategy, will kick us off. Thank you, Rachel. Big round of applause for Rachel and the panellists.
Thanks very much, Trent. Hello, everybody. I will introduce the panel here. So, mapping Darebin's climate emergency. I think what we've got here is a group of people who can tell us the story about how we got here. And we've got Bryony Edwards with a community perspective from community action in the climate emergency, and really keen to, I think councils are often they're given permission by their community, so the community perspective on how we got here is really critical. Susan Rennie, who we saw earlier today, but really telling the councillor's story about how this got on the agenda. And then Gavin Mountjoy from the Darebin Council staff team, and amongst other things, Gavin's led the Solar Savers program implementation for Darebin, which at a practical level has been quite an important part of taking action. So with no further ado, I'll ask Bryony to kick us off.
Yep, hi. I'll just give a quick background to how we got here today in less than 5 minutes. And when I say how we got here, I mean the community component. I want to thank our wonderful Darebin councillors. I get choked up so often when I give a talk and I come to the slide of Darebin councillors, I have to catch my breath, and yeah, so a warm round of applause for our Darebin councillors. So I'm not sure if you know, behind me is a map of Darebin. Darebin is a hotbed of climate activism, and it has been quite historically, and it has climate emergency activism background, because it has Philip Sutton and Adrian Whitehead, who back in the early noughties were thinking climate emergency. And, you know, the Climate Code Red that Philip wrote with David Spratt. Adrian co-founded Beyond Zero Emissions with Matt Wright. That did world first, went on to do world first research that is now being replicated around the world. So anyway, we also have in Darebin a really active climate network, Darebin Climate Action Now. There's lots of members, they really mobilise around elections and so on. And could I have the next slide, please? Yeah. So again, this is the Climate Emergency Petition, Climate Emergency Declaration. So what DCAN did, the Darebin Climate Action Now, is they approached all of the candidates, asked them to complete a climate emergency survey. It was very Adani focused, but there were some climate emergency questions in there too. Very cleverly, there was a question, do you resolve not to take donations from developers? So that was really clever because it really brought the integrity thing into matching climate emergency. And then they asked all of the candidates to hold a statement of support signing the Climate Emergency Declaration. And, there's examples of it up the back at our stall, the Community Action in the Climate Emergency stall where Adrian is sitting. So 6 out of the 9 successful candidates who became councillors had signed the Climate Emergency Declaration. And so it was very easy to approach them. What DCAN then did is they did a rating of all the councillors, said these are good guys, these are bad guys, and they handed it out to 2/3 of the households in Darebin, which is an incredible feat in itself. And they did that in partnership with Darebin Community Network. At the same time, Adrian and we run as Save the Planet candidates. We're climate emergency candidates. We run as climate emergency candidates to preference based on climate policy, to educate the other candidates and to get, in public forums, get the message out there, and wild dream to get elected one day. We both ran in Darebin in different wards, and just spruiking the climate emergency message in our respective forums, leafleting with that climate emergency message. And then we met including with Philip, we met one-on-one with most of who we thought would be the successful candidates and had that climate emergency discussion and said, you could do this. And a few years ago, we'd thought, a few of us, not me, had thought about what we would do, what local governments could do for a climate emergency response and, discuss that with the councillors, and they were all incredibly receptive. It was amazing. And it is true, you have that climate emergency response, you can get someone who's not even thinking about climate to thinking of climate emergency within 2 minutes, within the right words. And if you ever try and get signatures for the climate emergency declaration, you'll find that that is the case. So I'd say that's, for me, that's my perception of, so you add that and the incredible councillors that we got, and that's the recipe for me for how we got to that first stage of the climate emergency motion that they passed as their very first motion.
So tell us about your story, Susan.
Thanks, Rachel. Bryony's story actually leads very well into my story because I was one of the candidates who was approached to support the climate emergency declaration, and that language of climate emergency was new to me 2 years ago. I was one of I think, the vast majority of people in our community who understand that climate change is a real issue and want to do more. And so when I was approached, would I hold up a sign, would I have a photo saying I supported the climate emergency, that was an easy thing to do, and I think that most people who were approached, most of the candidates actually said yes. Now, partly candidates say yes because they do anything for good publicity and to get a photo. But one of the real benefits of that is that having said yes and being in a photo, when we all got elected, we couldn't then say no because we were in a photo. And even those of us who didn't know quite what it meant, when there was a motion in the very first meeting of council to declare a climate emergency, there were these photos of us all saying we supported the climate emergency, so we had to vote yes. Now, we did so very willingly, but I think it sort of normalised the next step, and that part of this journey is been about making the next step a natural and logical one to take. And I'm part of a council that really had significant changeover in the elections 2 years ago. So 5 of the 9 councillors were new to council, and that was a very significant shift. All 5 new councillors were women, so the council completely turned around from being very male-dominated with 2 women and 7 men to having 6 women on council. It shifted the focus, it shifted ideas about the way we do things. But we couldn't have got much further were it not for members of our community who walked alongside us and gave us the knowledge and the research and the ideas about what comes next. And so I think that the work of DCAN in that respect was really critical. Philip Sutton spent an extraordinary amount of time with me personally, making sure I had access to huge amounts of information and research, working up ideas, as did Adrian and others. So this is not something councillors did by themselves, and we very much needed that support from community members, and we also needed then support from officers. And I suppose at times it's felt like we're sort of the bridge between the officers who work within council and the community members. It's been a very significant shift in language and thinking, because I'll let you in on a secret, it's really easy for councillors to pass motions in the chamber. We do it all the time. We'll write to this politician and request that they, change immigration policy. We'll write to someone else and request they do something else. Now, all of those things are great and they sound terrific, but at the end of the day, many of them don't actually result in any change. So it would have been very easy for us to go into our first meeting as new councillors, declare a climate emergency and then say, well, we've done that. That wouldn't have actually got us to where we are now. There had to be actions that came behind that. And so the next part for us was working with staff to develop a climate emergency plan, working to develop Climate Emergency Darebin, which had an earlier iteration as the Darebin Energy Foundation, and actually thinking about what is it we're trying to achieve and what are the concrete actions that sit behind the declaration. And that's an ongoing piece of work, and this conference is part of that. But also I think that ultimately it's brought us closer to the staff and the community, and actually meant that we're now working quite closely to really progress action and to move that action outwards and upwards so that other councils do that as well.
Feels like it might be your turn, Gavin.
It does. Thank you, Rachel. This is from a staff perspective, and I'm pleased to hear that Susan didn't quite know what climate emergency meant for councillors, because that's what it felt like from a staff perspective. We didn't quite know what it meant either. We were in the middle of, as Susan said, reviewing our climate action policies and our adaptation policy. With more input from council and the community, we developed what was called the Climate Emergency Plan, and that's a copy. There are some copies available up at the back if you want to have a look at it in more detail. That was adopted in August 2017. We're presently working on a more detailed plan for council's carbon management and also community emissions, which will incorporate a drawdown plan. Our goal remains zero net greenhouse gas emissions by 2020 for council and the community, and very happy to talk to you about how we might achieve that later on. Every 4 years, council gets to set a new council plan, and officers get the chance to implement that plan. So in this 4-year plan, this council committed to doubling the amount of installed solar PV in Darebin, so going from 18,000 kilowatts to 36,000. And we're on track with the help of an expanded solar saver program to do that, to establish the Climate Emergency Foundation, to host a climate emergency conference. Here we are. Thank you all for coming, making it possible, and to engage with the community regarding the climate emergency. What difference does the climate emergency approach make? I think that's mostly a positive. It's certainly been additional work, and to try and bring that climate emergency framework approach has been a challenge. Council has asked us to mobilise the community around the climate emergency and to provide leadership. I think it would be fair to say this is a work in progress, but events such as this are a start. We're working on making our buildings, as you would expect, more efficient and powering them where possible with renewable energy. So this year we've got nearly $1 million to invest in solar PV on our own buildings. We're looking to transition our own buildings from gas to all electricity, so the time for gas as a transition fuel is up. We're looking at making our vehicle fleet more efficient, transitioning to all hybrid vehicles where appropriate, and eventually all electric vehicles. Divesting from financial institutions that lend to fossil fuels, and then continuing the engagement with the community around the climate emergency messaging. So that's, for us, is not just about making the community aware, but motivating and providing realistic opportunities for action, which will make a difference. In this year, we established the Climate Emergency Communication Engagement Project with Common Cause, our consultants, to help us in the task. This has been quite a challenging exercise, and if this topic of engaging the community around climate emergency interests you, go to the workshop tomorrow morning. I think it should be very interesting. What difference, where to for the future? I think we will explore the possibility of what an expanded solar saver program might be. How does the new Victorian Solar Homes program impact on us? Will that depress interest, or will it create interest? Is there a potential to expand into some energy efficiency applications such as heat pump hot water systems? Can we explore new ways of purchasing renewable energy, such as through a power purchase agreement, similar to the Melbourne Renewable Energy Project? and how can we continue to reduce waste such as green waste, either through biochar or energy to waste or other options. Finally, has it been easy? The answer is yes and no. The organisation has certainly provided more resources than at the time I've been at Darebin, which has been fantastic, and to facilitate us working at speed. At times, it certainly feels like it has been an emergency, and if you want to check that out, just ask Sam Green about the emergency, about preparing a climate emergency conference. We have felt a lot of pressure about trying to deliver some of this in the required time. But resources are constrained, and we live in a real world, and everything doesn't line up, so it's not always been easy. Darebin has 1,300 staff who are all tasked now with helping implement the climate emergency perspective on how we serve our community and each other. Has that happened? No. Sometimes yes, and it's very exciting to see that happen at times. But at times you just have to hold your breath and remember Darebin's a big ship and it takes a long time to turn a large ship around. Yes, we're on that journey, and I would personally like to thank councillors and the executive management team for taking us in this direction. It's exciting, it's fun, and very challenging. Do we have all the answers, or some of the answers? Maybe yes, maybe no. But I think we are discovering some along the way. But I think what we would like to do is invite you, your council and your local community group to join with us and support us, because we're going to need each other to address the climate emergency and to restore a safe climate for all.
I will shortly open to the floor for questions. Just before I do, I thought I might, Gavin, you covered what next. I thought I might ask the same thing of Bryony and Susan. What next from your perspective?
Okay. Since that motion was passed, so Susan then took a similar climate emergency motion to the MAV, the Municipal Association of Victoria, where 77% of Victorian councils supported that motion. So that means that chances are your council, wherever you live, supported that motion. You can now go to them and say, now it's time for you to act on it. We've then, my partner Adrian and I, with Community Action in the Climate Emergency, we spoke in Western Australia. There was a Western Australian council, Vincent Council, has passed a motion. Yarra and Moreland passed kind of acknowledgements of climate emergency. But the really exciting thing was then Philip works with the climate mobilisation in the US. So the story is, sorry, I don't want to go on too long. The story is they had got Bernie Sanders to put climate emergency mobilisation language into the Democratic National Platform. Hillary Clinton was going to win. It was all going to be hunky-dory. Then once Trump won, they were obviously very deflated. Philip said, this is what we're doing over here. We're focusing on local governments. And they went, no, I'm not interested. They were too depressed. Then they came back and said, actually, tell us about it. And so as a result, there's about 5 local governments in the US that have passed climate emergency motions, one of them being Los Angeles, which includes 5 million people, the city of Los Angeles. And they've also passed a motion. They're exploring the creation of a climate emergency department which will oversee the operations of all other departments. So that's how you do it. That's the governance you need to make sure climate emergency doesn't fall off the table. So what's next for us? We spoke in South Australia on Sunday. There were about 30 councillors in the room, very excited, very engaged. They want to do it. The South Australian elections are coming up. We survey candidates before elections. We do the same thing that DCAN did in Darebin and make sure there's groups on the ground to publicise those results. There's so much work to do. If you want to get your local government on board, or if you want to help us with the work we're doing nationally, please come and talk to us up the back.
I think as a councillor, I feel that I have a role in actually talking about the work that we're doing here in Darebin and making it seem possible for councillors in other councils all over Victoria and beyond. And partly that means actually thinking about what are the actions we can take in Darebin that are meaningful but achievable so that it doesn't seem too hard for people. Because I think that when people can't imagine what the change is that you're trying to achieve, they won't go down that path. When they can imagine it and when they see you doing it, it becomes easier. And I felt quite inspired by Bryn's talk that we just had, listening to super funds. Actually, the super fund in Victoria for local government is typically Vision Super, and local government super is the super fund in New South Wales. And I ask myself, should we change the default super fund for our council? You know, these are the sorts of things councils can think about. The governance manager will probably, you know, fly through the roof when I go with that suggestion. But I think we need to think about what are the levers that are available to local government, and that's a journey we're still on, but they are there, and we need to activate every one of them, and that's what we're going to be looking at over the next few years.
Okay, over to you guys. What do you want to know about?
Linda Bradburn, I am part of Wild Darebin. I'm interested to know from officers, councillor and an executive director, is there anything that can be done to make sure that should council change in a couple of years, that this work doesn't get lost? Is there anything that can be changed within the structure of council, the municipal strategic statement, that could make this work continue?
Look, I'm incredibly optimistic that now that this work has started, it will continue. And I say that because at every step along the way, the decisions that have been made by this council have been unanimous. They've united independent councillors, Greens councillors, Labor councillors. There hasn't been opposition. And so I don't believe this is something that will flip at the change of a couple of councillors. It might be different in a council where the votes were split 5-4 and it sort of mattered if someone wasn't in a meeting. But that isn't the case. Having said that, making sure it doesn't change is actually something that our community needs to get involved in. So the amazing work of DCAN in the lead up to the last council election made it clear that this was a significant priority and that this was an issue on which people would cast their votes. And that does make a big difference. But we are a progressive community, and I think that having community members who keep us on our toes is really important and vital.
Diane Lacroix. I live in MacLeod, which is just at the border of Banyule and Darebin, but luckily I'm in the Darebin part. I was very impressed with your consultation process. They came to our village to see how we could support your declaring an emergency and how you roll out the solar panels program. But my question is, these panels only have a life expectancy of, mine now, 21 years. 25 years. Inverters are 5 or 10 years. What is in process so that we don't have a pollution of solar panels in 25 years?
My understanding is solar panels now have a minimum warranty of around 20 to 22. They're probably going to go for 30 to 40 years. So I've heard some of the ones that were produced 10, 15 years ago have a working life still at 30 years. Of course, their efficiency goes down about 1% per year. Inverters, when I first installed mine, I was told it was going to be 5 to 7 years. It's still going at, I think, close to 10. All the ones that we put in through the Darebin Solar Saver program have a warranty of 10, and I think that's going to get longer. Sorry, not the warranty, but the actual working life will continue. Most things we have has a working life. A battery in a car has a life. Yes, it's better when the technology gets cheaper. If you look at the energy inputs, solar recovers that in about 1 to 2 years.
Is there a planning how to collect all these solar panels?
In terms of recycling, yes, there are some emerging industries now. that are recycling. We've not been in the process yet of having to facilitate that, but there are recycling places for solar panels, I understand.
But I think that would be a really good point to think about it, about recycling, even panels that come off the roof now to put new on. There is no program yet in, I think, Victoria to deal with recycling of the panels.
So I think that's right. I do know the state government's turning their mind to it as part of their e-waste work that they're doing. So I don't know where they will get to, but I know they're thinking about that problem. They're aware that it's coming, and we're keeping an eye on that as well.
Hello, my name's Leanne Skipsey. I'm with Be the Change Australia. I was just picking up on this question here about sustainability and putting it to you, Susan, around sustainability of the climate emergency within the structures of council. I'm just wondering if there's things being built into the municipal public health plan within Darebin, and that if so, then that's something that could be duplicated across all the municipal public health plans because they're legislated, and they're certainly across Victoria. I'm not sure if they're national. Yep.
So every council in Victoria has to do a municipal public health plan. We also have to do a council plan. So the council plan is the overriding document for the whole of council's operations, and responding to the climate emergency is a very major plank of our council plan, and that determines a significant the directions that council goes and the resources that are invested in different aspects of council work. Now, council plan goes for 4 years, so it is for the life of the council and a few months beyond while the new council starts to develop a new council plan. And that is a difficulty, I suppose, in councils all over Victoria and in governments everywhere, that many of these plans do tend to be 4-year plans, and you can't easily dictate what happens beyond that. And it's the same with our budget cycles. So we could say, well, we want a 10-year plan, but the reality is a future council could come along and actually say, well, that was the last council's plan, we have a different plan. So I think that the key to ensuring that the work continues is to make sure that there's clarity around what we're seeking to achieve, and to make sure that people know what we are achieving, and that it looks meaningful and that it looks worthwhile. Because I think 4 years from now, or 3 years from now, when they're about to finish or have just completed a new council plan, if they look back, if the councillors at that point in time look at what was done in this term of council and they say, that was amazing work, it was groundbreaking, it really set the agenda, they will want to continue with that. And I think that's actually the most significant determinant of whether the work will continue, is the effectiveness that we have now.
Hi, Indy from Yarra City Council. Interested, you talked about the resourcing to turn the declaration into real action. Can you give us an idea of the sort of resourcing? I guess probably the Solar Savers is one of the flagship projects. So what's the kind of resourcing that council's committed, I guess financially, and also staff? What's the sort of thing that councils need to do to really make this sort of thing happen?
I think that was code for how much does Indy need to ask his councillors for as well. So over to you, Gavin.
Thank you, Indy. So doubling of the solar was the council plan goal through an expanded solar saver, and this council committed to allocate $20 million to an expanded solar saver program. So the way, if you're not quite sure how solar saver works, council puts up the money, pays for the new solar PV system on the roof of a householder, and then the householder pays it back over 10 years, in our case interest-free, in quarterly instalments. So the bulk of that money gets repaid to council, so we forego the interest in the bank. In Darebin's case, they had those funds, but otherwise it could have been borrowed. And we estimate around 3,000 plus households. It was over 4, but because the system sizes are getting larger, around 4.3 kilowatts now, we're saying it'll be over 3,000 households, and that's what our $20 million will buy. There are some operational costs, you're right, in terms of staffing. There are about 3 to 4 full-time staff working on on the expanded Solar Saver program as we gear up to work with businesses and different sections of the residential community. If you haven't got solar, now is an absolutely fantastic time because you can get a rebate from the Victorian government. We're just about to get confirmation that Darebin Solar Saver households will be eligible for that rebate. So that's $2,225 or close to it off. If the Solar Saver program continues, you'll be able to repay the remainder off. This morning, announcement was made around batteries, a $4,800 rebate. So this is pretty interesting times. We will give you a 10-year warranty on all works and installations, and if you buy it through the Solar Saver program, it's GST exempt plus our bulk buying. So it's excellent value for a really good quality system.
I'd just like to add that it's easy to think about that as a cost. You know, what would the cost to your council be? I think of that as an investment. And I think it's really important how we talk about the money that we are going to spend responding to the climate emergency and recognise it as an investment in our future, the future of the planet, the safety of the climate that we live in. And once we start talking about it as an investment, I think it might shift people's perhaps reluctance to spend that kind of money.
Hi, my name's Meg Montague. I've lived in Darebin for 32 years, so I've seen 8 different councils, and I have to say the last 2 years have been very exciting and very inspiring, so thank you for that, both council officers and councillors and those who got them there. My question's around the scourge of the 21st century, the fossil fuel guzzling motor car that everybody has to have, or possibly even 2. I'm hoping that that council's going to be a leader, as it is in this regard, around sustainable transport. We've got an opportunity there, and I'd really like to hear what kind of future you'd hope to see, and the modelling that you can do for other councils of reasonable density in the inner city in terms of promoting sustainable transport.
I might give a very quick overview and then hand over to Gavin to add some detail. But we have significantly increased our investment in safer cycling and walking paths, and also our investment in advocacy for better public transport. We recognise these things are incredibly important. I'm actually really optimistic about what's going to happen in this space, because I think there's a generation of young people who are growing up now who actually aren't going to want to own a motor vehicle, partly because there's car share vehicles popping up everywhere, partly because there is a future of autonomous electric vehicles that will zip around and pick you up, and that will be more efficient and more sensible for many people than car ownership. And as much as we hate congestion, in some ways, a certain level of congestion actually drives people out of their motor vehicles and onto public transport. And so I think there's a whole lot of factors, many of which are actually beyond the actions that we will take here in Darebin, that actually mean that we are heading towards a future in which rates of car ownership are actually going to be lower and those cars will be cleaner.
Thanks, Meg. Darebin, I don't think, will be the leader in electric vehicles. That's probably going to be Moreland, and we take our hats off to them and thank them for doing that. This year we've committed funds to buy 2 electric vehicles and to install 2 electric vehicle charging stations, one to recharge the council vehicles, which we'll need. It'll be behind a fence, and one will be a free public charging station. That's our commitment for this year. The challenge is the EV market is really awkward here in Australia. We're a small market, we're not getting the choices, and I think if we had the availability of the mid or lower priced EV market vehicles, local government would be able to step up a little bit. One of the things some of the organisations are looking at together through the alliances is about getting a bulk buying deal to make sure, for example, Nissan Leaf get their vehicle out here sooner rather than later. If we could get some of those lower priced EVs in the market, we would then start to see the change. But unfortunately, we're slow, the Australian market situation. I think when we get there, we will be a quick early adopter, as we have been with a whole lot of other technologies like solar PV and mobile phones.
All right, I'd like your help in saying thank you very much to our panel.